Welcome to the first Nature Calling podcast from the National Landscape Association. My name is Corenza McLarnon, the Arts Development and Programme Manager for Nature Calling. Nature Calling podcasts bring together artists and experts from across disciplines to chat about artistic practice. This conversation is one of a series of 6, part of a much wider programme of work taking place across England this summer. You can find out more at Nature Calling website, which is naturecalling.org.uk. For this conversation, Rob St John, the Nature Calling commissioned artist for Forester Bowland National Landscape, talks with his long-term friend and collaborator, geologist and ecotherapist Ruth Allen, about his project, Are You Lost?
Are You Lost? There's going to be 3 installation locations. They're going to be film, sound, and kind of large textiles.
What I'm very interested in is how your friendship really came about, and how do you feel you bring your 2 disciplines together?
So Ruth and I have been working together for a few years now. I think one of the big kind of shared common grounds that we have is kind of over the role of listening, and especially group listening, not only to each other, but to the world around us, and what that can do to us as people, what it can do in terms of our environmental experience, our ethic, our politics. And so we've been exploring that in a variety of projects. But yeah, I think, I don't want to speak for us, but certainly from my experience, it's a kind of definite ongoing process of learning. You know, kind of we end up sending quite a lot of wind-infused voice notes from the top of moors being like, Ruth, the rock's not quite sounding as I thought it was going to sound, and kind of putting weird and wonderful microphones into limestone pavements. But, you know, over the years of talking back and forth between, listening to the world and listening to people, listening to each other, we've kind of formed this sense of collaboration.
I second that. I think we're both really interested in different scales around listening, different, and perhaps something we'll come on to, different levels of intimacies in listening, from that very intimate space through to that sort of political listening. So yeah, I think, we're in that same sort of circle of interest, and as you say, we send each other voice notes and just run things we've read that are interesting, because we intersect, and obviously we also share a sort of an interest in landscape and being in the land, and being on the land, and some kind of affinity between us to the Trough of Bowland and the northern landscapes.
And there's probably a similar sense of journey, for want of a better term, there as well, isn't there? Of you starting off as a geologist and now being, not only a kind of ecotherapist, but also a writer and an artist in your own regard. And for me, just being an outdoors lad, growing up in Bowland, side of Pendle Hill, and thinking, right, what's the best way I get to spend as much time outdoors as I possibly can? And for me, that was thinking, right, I'll do a geography degree. And then through, wayward behaviour and playing in bands and doing exhibitions and stuff, somehow 20 years later, I've ended up being an artist.
Ruth, within your own practice, and obviously connecting a therapeutic approach to landscape, how you think people connect through landscape? Is that nurture? Is that sort of nature nurture?
Yeah, I think that's something that we will definitely come to. And I think, because I think we're both concerned with what is the, role of place, and this, Rob's project with National Landscapes it's really in there. For me, perhaps there is a sense that it can be more diffuse, particularly in a therapeutic realm. I work, for sort of political reasons outside, for philosophical reasons. There's a whole sort of theory of mind and place and eco-psychology there around why I'm outside. But of course, there is something ambiguous about that as well. So I think there's interesting the way that can come into the therapeutic space, and I hope that it does, and that comes in different ways on that very local scale, compared to perhaps that deliberate intention at the community level that Rob's project, I think, is designed to sort of get into.
And Rob, could you speak a little bit more then how you've been addressing that sense of place and belonging within Are You Lost, and maybe your wider practice?
There's a real kind of sense of inside and outside. The communities I've been working in, and I know you've worked in a lot in the past, Corenza, around Pendle and Burnley and Nelson. as some of the most deprived areas in England. And, just a few miles away, you have land owned by some of the richest people in England. So within a few miles, you have this kind of transect of inside and outside, often in these post-industrial towns, these former mill towns. You can see the hills, but you might not ever be able to get to them or go or feel that you can kind of journey to that land. And I think it can be a case of so near, so far. So really, I've been wanting to kind of circle these fringes of Bowland to think about how actually this landscape isn't an island. It's kind of constantly made through interactions and back and forth with the outside. And, we can think about that in terms of flows of capital and trade and industry, not only over previous centuries, but for hundreds, thousands of years. And so what I wanted to do is kind of really dig deep into what were the lives of people living around the fringes of Bowland like, and what were their kind of perceptions of Bowland, what are the things that are holding them back from being able to access it more, and there is a quiet politics there of saying, well, actually this landscape is absolutely for everybody.
And Ruth, within your own work, how do you address those types of access to land? How do you bring that landscape into people's lives?
Yeah, it's different, I think. I have a different sort of practice. I'm working primarily one-to-one in psychotherapy with adults, and then in other various sort of group or and online settings, which still, I hope, is always infused with the outdoor sense of place and bringing, into the kind of psychological domain, I suppose. But access, if you're asking about access, that's a difficult one. It's very political. Psychotherapy is also an enclosure, part by design, and it's, we are intentionally trying to create a safe space. But safe for who and what's on the outside and what's on the inside, but also the political aspect of, we have a huge mental health crisis. We don't have enough therapists, enough counsellors, there isn't enough provision. So there are real tensions in access to therapy and access to a place-based therapy, just as there are in the landscape. So actually all of these themes, they start to intersect. There is something core, I think, at the heart of whether it's art or therapy or listening. It's, who is being listened to, who gets to be listened to, and how do we kind of break that down? And I think that's a real challenge in my work when I work in a sort of a very private one-to-one way, how to open that out and some, that you have to be creative. And that's the value, I think, of creative practice. And that's why I spend a lot of time not just working in that quite intimate field of psychotherapy and one-to-one, but writing books, sharing practice, sharing thoughts around this, because there is a need to get these ideas into the public domain as well.
So what do you reflect on that? I mean, a lot of the things that Ruth has just mentioned then sort of I see within your work in terms of that sense of access and those personal interactions between the people that you work with and being in that space.
Everything has been enriched and challenged and pushed and made deeper by all these people. Some of the kids I've worked with and the young people have just been so fabulous and so clever and insightful and perceptive. And I think in terms of the role you take on going into a project like this, is one of my young people in a school said early on, it's like, I thought we were working with an artist today, but all you do is ask weird questions. So yeah, maybe that is my new artistic practice, just asking weird questions. But it's certainly something I take from kind of paying attention to your work, Ruth, is that actually it's about creating listening spaces. It's about creating proving grounds, whether they're temporary or whether they're kind of long-term over a series of workshops or tutorials or whatever you're doing with people. It's about making sure that people feel listened to, and that they have the kind of confidence, and that you can kind of transfer whatever form of skill, whether that's through sound recording or mark making or film recording or writing or anything that we're doing here. It's not an extractive thing of, that traditional model of researcher or artist turning up somewhere and extracting something for their work. It's perhaps more of a channeling, and it's trying to find creative strategies and creative spaces for that channeling.
Yeah, and that word creativity keeps coming back, doesn't it? And that has a lot of resonance in my work, I think, as creativity as expression, which everyone has a right to, and everyone has the skills for within themselves. It feels that there is, when I've been reading your notes, it's not about an art installation, although it has that aspect, and you bring that. It's actually about facilitating the inherent creativity in everyone. And I love that idea that the wellspring of that, that it's here, it's there, it's it's in everyone, and giving. Sometimes I think in the arts in particular, it's incumbent upon those who are on the inside to say that this is for everyone, because it's like another thing that can feel ring fenced and that there's no access for. And as you get older, like I am now, that you sort of think, well, I'm not going to wait around for permission. But I've got the ability to do that for myself, but to be able to offer that for young people or people who feel really on the outside and say, no, it's not about making art. It's about tapping into your own idiosyncratic way of seeing the world and feeling the world, and that is so needed. That is so has a place in the landscape in everyone's lives. So
yeah, and it's that kind of, it's not holding creativity up as a kind of a thing that only the skilled or the trained or the educated artists can do, but it's actually, creativity is the kind of the ongoing set of acts that all of us do that build a landscape and build a life, right? And it's like, it could be, filmmaking or sound recording, or in your case, kind of like moving with rocks, or, or whatever it is, but it could also be dry stone walling, or it could be, the way you build a fence, like the way you shear a sheep, like all these things. It sounds ridiculous in a way, but it's so true. There is a care and a skill and and I think sometimes that can be a common ground. It's every landscape is constantly coming into being through the acts that we do, rather than being preserved in aspect, and I think that's certainly, again, a kind of quiet radicalism in a place like Bowland that has this very set kind of historical narrative of what it is and who it's for. And I think, you must see it, and I'd love to hear you talk about it in your work, where you take clients outside kind of to do the therapeutic work, because I see it in every, session I do, where I take groups out from the town into the hills, and we do, sometimes we do focused sessions, and sometimes we just play, and mess about in the river, and, build things in the forest. And there is a sense of unfurling, perhaps, that you see in people. And I think, that slow, patient kind of observation of that is really fascinating. I don't know how you reflect on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I often think that left to our own devices, probably as adults, we probably default to sensible and the interjects that we take on about how to be over in our lives. So there is something that I'm coming back to in my practices at the moment, be it therapeutic and art-based, or whatever you want to call them, creative practices, about coming back to playfulness and going back to that idea of just expression and unfolding and unfurling. And I think when you trust in that as an inevitability, if you create the right conditions, then great and exciting things happen. And I think that's where I'm at the moment, is really feeling the value of, if you just create the space, if you just invest in creative space holding and places for people just to be, and you create, and that creating that environment is no small thing, I would also say. It takes that is built over time. It's another thing you can't force. You don't just say, here's a space, like, now be free and playful. But if you work to create that and that ambience and that ethic in your work, then so much comes out of that. And I've seen that actually in my therapeutic work, in other work, it's the most transformative. It's that kind of creative play, whether it's being done by young people. I don't work with young people, but whether it's with adults as well, there is something very vitalizing that sort of springs up. And there's space sort of for all of it. Yeah.
It's an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because on the surface of it, all of this chat that we're having can seem quite surface level about, play or, experience or unfurling. But actually, I think what it is, it has an incredible depth to it. And it has a real kind of emotional and political kind of potential to it that I really enjoy kind of shuttling between. I mean, anybody who's worked with people in the past will know that, it's quite often you shuttle between those two poles of the very daft and like the incredibly profound. I wondered if maybe is that your experience?
I think I don't know. I mean, I just keep coming back to listening and mattering. I thought that was a really good word, that everything can matter and everything does matter and everything is fruitful and rich in that way. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's probably above my cognitive level to think how that gets communicated to policymakers and funders. But I think you're really right. There is the profound next to the very sort of silly and absurd, and that's life, and all of this can be very serious, but all of it needs to also be playful, but also just logistics hold up the ability to be profound and playful. So, when I was thinking about your project, I was thinking about how the devastation of there being no buses and it taking 2 hours, like if you have barriers to playfulness and barriers to profundity that is just a bus stop, just a bus ride away, again, the deeply pragmatic thing of just needing some of those basic bits to be in place. Then you hold the space, then you get people in, and then you listen, and you listen like it all matters. You have to listen like it all matters, and without agenda. And I think that's something that the therapeutic sphere or therapists try and move towards, that and that's very hard when you're doing funding programs and policies, because it's rich in agenda. And there is always that sort of third arm that can be present in therapy. But that's one thing I love about the therapeutic space, is you just open the space and be confident to hold what emerges. And I would love to see more funding put to that, more trust in people and creative people to say, actually, what is going to emerge is going to be what matters, and not to sort of over-engineer that from the off, but to sort of trust your creatives, trust your locals, trust relationships to deliver what they need when you bring people together. I didn't think I was going to end up with that answer, but I really, as I say it, I really feel it's true. I really feel like trusting relationships is one thing that is often not present in a lot of the ways that we can exist between the individual and society. And actually, I think I'm there at my answer.
And just as we wrap up, I just wanted to first of all say thank you ever so much to Ruth and Rob for being our first Nature Calling and Conversation event. Maybe, Rob, if you just wanted to quickly run through where we can see your project coming up over the summer.
They're going to be on show at Pendle Festival of Culture on the 28th of June. They'll be at Ginny's Barn in Dunsop Bridge between the 1st and the 3rd of August. And then they'll be at Gisborne Forest Hub on the 30th and 31st of August. So 3 locations from the middle of the town to the middle of Bowland. And at each installation location, there'll be tons of kind of workshops and activities that people can come and get involved in.
Yes, so please do come along if you're local. Otherwise, keep an eye on our website. We'll be updating across all the 6 projects across the country. Thanks again to Ruth and Rob. Join us for the next Nature Calling conversation between David Blandy and Daniel Locke, commissioned artist for Surrey Hills National Landscape, with Dr. Lena Grinstead, senior lecturer in zoology at the University of Portsmouth, who studies the evolution of group living. Visit naturecalling.org.uk to find out more about the programme. Thanks very much and see you next time.